This is Issara with UX Emotion. Jennifer is one of the most talented people I've ever met across the board in over 20 years of working in multiple industries, working with multiple high performance people. I know that's like putting you on a pedestal, but like aside from being really cool and and just an awesome person to hang out with, we met working at Artifact back in the day. I feel like I always learn an amazing amount from you. And I still like working with you. I can still remember lessons that I still apply today. Let me start touching on some of the stuff from our call because it was so valuable for people because when I think if there's anything I've been trying to bring to the world of motion and product design, it's this idea of like that you should heavily justify what you're doing. And this is a huge change from when I started. It was all about just making things look cool. And to a certain degree, I think that's true in certain like places like on Dribbble and stuff. But in the real world, in like product design, everything is justifiable. And you brought up two things that so the context that I want to put this in is, I talked to a lot of designers, and what they're looking for is to really have an edge in their portfolio and to get that job. And of course, this is like the holy grail, right? This is what everybody wants all the time. And they get completely contradictory information from all kinds of people, and it's frustrating and overwhelming. I'm focusing on adding motion because I think it adds value both at a portfolio level, at least it can, and at a product level as well, and at a business level. And so part of the context we were talking about was just portfolios, and you look at a lot of work. And you mentioned two things that I've never heard anybody mention, which is that you talk about when you see work, especially like motion, it really has to focus on the problem and the constraints. And I thought these were just amazing ideas. And I was wondering if you could kind of revisit that conversation again in terms of like what you're looking for. And especially if you don't see these things happen, if it's just like kind of like fluff motion or just gratuitous, and it's really doesn't have this context, like how that is for you.
Yeah, so when I first joined Oracle, we are starting a brand new division from scratch. And so the hiring was madness. We're hiring every single aspect of UX design across the board, all disciplines worldwide, to build brand new world-class team with the intention of creating a new design movement within Oracle and reimagining the entire brand and all 300 cloud-based products. So huge effort. Oracle is one of the only technology companies who hasn't gone through some kind of a design movement or design revolution, and now we're doing it. So with that in mind and building this whole new team, I can't even tell you how many resumes, how many people around the world, and you can kind of get a sense of the different styles and education based on different regions and things like that, and cultural influences and all sorts of things like that. But across the board, I think looking at such a wide variety of roles and options that we're trying to recruit, like the top talent in the world, it's really amazing how, somebody will invest so much money in going to the best education and, putting so much effort, sweat equity into these projects. And when they're representing them in their portfolio, there's absolutely zero visibility into what problems they're solving. Like, why are you designing it this way? And oftentimes, I'll see some resumes that look gorgeous, like eye candy, slick, but as soon as you get a layer deeper, you start questioning, well, why did they do this? Or why did they apply this motion in this way? And there's no articulation around what the problem is. So that to me is the first and foremost thing that I look for in somebody who not only, the skills, having the aesthetics and having the skills and having a grasp on how to use the tools, that's a table stake. This is our our discipline is still fairly new, but there's a lot of us and there are a lot of opportunities, and we got to make sure we nail the skills, the table stakes. And that just comes with the territory of being a UX designer. So once you have that under your belt, then you know, we really look for folks that can articulate a problem. And sometimes you don't know what the problem is because maybe you're trying to investigate a brand new domain or a specific target user that you have no personal experience with, which is when I entered into Oracle for some of the products, no idea what these domains are or who these folks are or what their jobs are.
Wow.
And in fact, I've been learning about there's whole disciplines with education system. People go up, you know, they get their undergrad and graduate and postdoctorate, and no idea. So, but it's really a matter of, you know, even if you're in those situations and trying to solve something, you might not know what the problem is that you're trying to solve, but you can hypothesize. And even coming up with, you know, here's what I think might occur or what I think they might need. You know, coming up with that can really help frame the problem, help you come up with constraints, and then that will lead to innovation and really great design. And that is key, absolute key to be able to show and articulate in the work, especially in portfolios. You know, this is people putting their best work forward. You got to be able to say, here's a problem I'm trying to solve. I might not have solved it correctly, or here's like 5 different variations of trying to solve it, and here 4 that failed and why. But you have to be able to articulate, here's what I was trying to do.
Totally. And I think from our, like, the gist when I'm talking to people too is like, like motion stands out, like it's eye-catching, you know, like it is. But then it's kind of this weird thing where like, okay, you're like, okay, this person does design work. They have the basics, like you're saying, they've got the standard design skills. And on top of that, they have this motion skill set as well. They have these pieces. But then like, it's sort of like the opportunity then is if you can take that ability to define your problem very well, which is, it's weird. And I love this conversation because this is one of the first things that I brought to, I think, my training was like, motion is not just this cool thing. It is an ability. It is a tool to solve problems. And if you're not solving a problem, then like I literally tell people in the workshop, the first step to designing motion is making a case for motion because it's expensive, it's problematic, it can go very wrong. There's all these reasons not to do it. So the first step on any project is to just make a case for motion. If you can't make a case for motion, I would say that's a pretty good red flag that you shouldn't do motion in your product.
Yep.
And so that's like the first thing. And so I just love that you hit on that. And I think what's missing is like people just are challenged by, you know, really making a case for it, defining the problem in their portfolio and saying, look, like, you know, we determined that, you know, motion might be an appropriate tool to use to solve this problem. And here's why.
Yeah. And the other thing, like when you're new in your career, you want to be able, you're trying to show as many things and as much capability that you have as possible. So, you know, it's really easy to get into the trap of sort of going ape shit on doing crazy motion stuff without constraining. Yeah. And so let me give you an example. So we're very sensitive animals to motion, and it really doesn't take much to notice something moving on a screen. And one example is, and I won't use any examples from my current role, but in the past, what I've seen is there's some UX problem that we're trying to solve, and then somebody wants to add motion because they want to make it sexy or add shizzle or make it kind of cool.
Yeah.
But they're not defining what that means.
Yeah.
And so they might work on something like a transition from one screen to the next. Like maybe you go from home screen, you click into an item, and then you're going into that item's detail screen. So a transition there, if if somebody isn't constraining themselves, they can go crazy. They can say, oh, let's do like paper origami that unfolds it. Right. And then that animation takes like 30 seconds to unfold. Or let's make it a whole cube, and the cube rotates and it pivots into another, like morphs into another room or something. Or
I've seen it all, yeah.
Let's do time warp and zoom you in and zoom you out. And, like, yes, you're capable technically to execute on all of those. Yeah. Not you, Issara, but you and a designer. But is that the right solution for the task? And often, depending on the type of product you're designing for, if it's something like a productivity tool, the reason why you might want to invest in a transition is to quickly get somebody into a certain task and have context into where they came from.
Exactly.
Where they're going to come out of.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that right there is a problem you're identifying and you're already constraining. So that starts to constrain the motion to, maybe it's minimal, it's short, quick. You show like one peak to give context, then you can start to add those constraints, which then will lead to more sophisticated solution. And it might be something that is moving for a fraction of a second. But with motion, because we're so sophisticated, even a fraction of a second can increase the usability of a product significantly and create sort of this emotional response that makes it sticky and makes people want to use it. And they're like, ooh, that felt good to click this thing and go into the detail. I want to keep doing that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpack from that, like if you're watching this, I think, the takeaway is like, if you decide to use, if you like, you develop your hypothesis, and this is, I love it because these are literally the exercises that I do in my workshop. Is like, you develop your hypothesis, you come up with ways to test it, and then you figure out how to validate it, right? And all of that thing should be in your portfolio and communicated. Now, the other thing that you touched on that I thought was like incredibly valuable too was that it's okay, that context in your portfolio is super important, so that it's okay to do experiments and like go off and do something and say, hey,
absolutely,
I wanted to learn this thing. But the context of that is really important, right? So like in our call last time, you gave an example of this, really fancy demo that showcased all of these different skills, but it was contextualized as like, well, I was solving this problem for the product and here's the value. And it's clear that like, dude, you made things a lot worse. Like if you just took out all that stuff, you'd probably have a better product. Now, if the context had been, look, I just want to showcase my skills and that this is just a vehicle, and I fully understand that this is not solving problems. I just want to show you that I can do some of these things and I can, and perhaps even like, here's why these things are harmful and we shouldn't do them, but I have to have some vehicle to like showcase my skills. Like really putting that context together is critical, because if you don't do that, someone like you is going to look at it and think that this person thinks that what they're doing should have been in the product.
Yep.
And then you're gone. You've blown it. You're out.
Absolutely. And we talked about framing yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's all about, you have to be really clear and frame your own work. And I have my daughters coming into the room. You have to be able to frame your own work and frame other work, and it's all about framing and setting the right expectations. So absolutely. I know in my work in my portfolio, I have a whole experimental section where it's like, I state, hey, this is a dumb concept.
Yeah.
I'm not really solving this problem.
Perfect.
At all.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do is explore ways to integrate more seamlessly a circuit into fabric.
Yeah.
So let's look at a whole bunch of these. Yeah, what it's doing functionally is stupid. But it's solving the problem to blend the technology and the aesthetics of that in a really elegant way that then can be applied to solving a problem. But it's all in the framing of it.
Yeah, I tell people in the workshop, like if you can use motion to falsify a theory, that's incredibly powerful. If like you can come up with a mock-up, like a really great mock-up, and say, look, here's why this is a bad idea. That's like a whole advanced ability to have, not just to make cool shit and impress people, but to actually use this as a tool to say, look, we're going to prove here why this is a bad idea using motion, you know?
And when somebody is reviewing a portfolio and evaluating you as a designer, you get hired. One, you got to have the table stakes of having the skills, but you get hired by the way you think and the way you problem solve. So if you're framing up a problem and you're showing, okay, I went through these 5 different options, and then you are going back and doing a critical analysis on that and saying, hey, this is why I don't think this works, and this is why I think this works. That right there is a skill that is super valuable to any hiring manager, is to be able to apply that critical analysis to your own work. And the way that you articulate it on your site is an indication of how you're going to collaborate with other teams and push ideas forward and make them better.
That's great. And I just have a couple last questions, because I know you're being super generous with your time. And I guess I'm just curious, like when you say constraints, like I always think of like constraints can partially be like platform constraints, like resources, like engineer skills, like and so I don't know if when you think of constraints, those are constraints that you also factor in, or is it more? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it's sort of you really have to look at the situation you're in, the context you're in, and the product you're solving.
Yeah.
You can't just solve for a product. You also have to understand the environment and resources you have to execute on that.
Yeah.
So there's business constraints, there's
Right.
user constraints, there's technical constraints. It's oftentimes, if it's a huge user base, can the product support it and make the trend, the motion smooth and performant?
Oh yeah, I did a workshop for this company. I don't think they'll mind me talking about it. Lutron, and they're a fascinating place, and they make hardware. They've been making like kind of like really advanced lighting systems for really rich people for a long time. So like custom lighting house, like sci-fi kind of stuff. But in the last like maybe 15 years, they've gotten into more consumer technology with an app on your phone that drives lights and all this kind of stuff. So they have this most divided user group I've ever heard of. So on one hand, they have these like old school, more like older people who want all hardware stuff and are like apps. I don't know about the app thing. I don't know about the software thing. And on the other hand, they have these like new generation users who are just all about like, doing cool stuff. And it was a really interesting conversation for them. Like, do they keep these things really separate? Do they try and find the middle? Like, this is a very fascinating constraint. And I personally love these kinds of constraints because, and this is something we touched on our last conversation, was like, constraints are the engine of creativity, right? And this is like why it's critical that you feature constraints. So you have to feature the problem, you have to feature your constraints, because this is what drives your direction, right? Like if you don't do this as a hiring manager who's looking at your portfolio, you're just like, there's no way to make sense of this. And I think in an abstract way, it's part of the story, right? Like this is the story of what you've done. And these are critical pieces in that story.
Yes, I think the other one to add to that for constraints, and I've been struggling with this definition myself, but it's patterns. I don't know if it's part of constraints, but we're heading towards patterns. Like in UX, we create patterns now. We hardly ever do just one-offs.
Yeah.
Even the tools we use, it's all about building libraries of components, common components that can be reused. And that's also part of motion design. Is we have a real opportunity to create in any product a language and paradigms specifically for motion. And part of that is identifying what are patterns and how do those patterns, how are they meaningful to the brand and the overall experience. Like, for example, maybe you have button transitions that are the motion always goes horizontally. So it's always like X, Y. So it always like fades from left to right. Or when it's coming on the screen, it comes on from right to left or something like that. So, you know, finding patterns that can be used common with a set of common behaviors, I think is also critical. And that's something that certainly for people coming out of school, fresh out of school, aren't thinking like that quite yet.
Yeah.
But once you start to work in, you know, larger corporations, or even, you know, once you start working on bigger products, UX products, you have to start thinking in terms of patterns. And there's a huge opportunity to create a whole language around motion using these patterns.
Yeah, I highly went in the exercises I do. If people are designing something, it's important to distinguish whether this is like if this fits into the ecosystem of other things that are there. Yeah. I do think it's okay to sometimes design these like hero kind of things, but to really silo it and to say, okay, this is a hero thing, and maybe, you know, parts of it fit into the ecosystem, maybe not, but in general, the lion's share of the work is in that family of transitions and all that kind of stuff. And to really make sure that you're presenting that, I think, as a constraint as well, you know? Yeah, that's really, really, really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you feel like is, again, I'm trying to train an army of badasses so that when you see their work, you're like, oh, okay, whew, these guys get it, right? Like they just get it. And, you know, so that's kind of my goal, is to just bring more quality and standards to this discipline. Is there anything else you're like looking for, or a don't, you know, like I think we've covered some like incredibly valuable stuff actually.
For me, I'm just looking for really, really amazing talent that can clearly articulate a problem and show, you know, how their explorations solve that problem or don't solve the problem.
Right.
And then, you know, be able to work within some constraints, and ultimately it's just about framing the work well. Because at the end of the day, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, nobody works in a silo. Nobody works alone. You have to collaborate. UX is a highly, highly collaborative discipline.
Totally.
And you got to be able to communicate your ideas and why your ideas can contribute to the bigger picture, and why your ideas are good and will solve a problem. And it's about framing, and it's about articulating a problem, and you just have, that's a table stakes now, is to be able to do that.
Right.
And you do that in your portfolio. Like, just write a sentence saying, I was just experimenting on this. Don't worry, I'm not trying to solve a problem. I just wanted to make a button glow. Here's 5 glowy buttons.
Yeah.
Just frame it up.
Yeah. No, it's funny though, with motion, I feel like people's brains just shut off. Like it's the weirdest thing, like with design and UX, it's like, okay, yes. And it's like we kind of enter naturally into this problem solving mode. But when it comes to motion, people see it. It's like there's some part of their brain that just shuts off, which is why like I just drill people over and over when I'm teaching them is like, sure, it's okay to talk about the mechanics, but speak to the value, the user, the product, and the business. Like, you have to train yourself, and you see people struggle, and it just biases them towards talking about, well, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
Not the value that it's bringing. And I have to like bring them back. And so it's like, it's just been hilarious to me to see this, that there's something about motion that seems to like almost like bypass the linguistic part of our minds or something, and speak to this higher level. And it's just been kind of funny to me to see how hard it is for designers who are so good at crafting the problem. But when it comes to this, it just like, it falls apart. It's amazing. So I spend like a lot of my time just being like, okay, I'm gonna pull it back. What is the value here, you know?
It makes sense that, I mean, because it's so technical to execute it well, that it's easy to start getting into the mechanics of it when you're speaking.
Exactly.
Nobody cares about the mechanics.
Nobody cares. Do not talk to your PM or your stakeholder about the mechanics. Like,
right.
It's not going to go anywhere.
So one last thing, Issara, is inspiration. I think is key too. Like, don't be afraid to find other great work out there that has a really good feel or a sense of timing, or you know, and you know, don't be afraid to use that and share that with people, and be transparent that you're inspired by that particular thing or a collection of ideas, because you know, that's also a great learning tool because motion, like, it's all in the subtleties. It's super all in the subtleties. So just timing. You can spend days on trying to get the right timing to get a different timing will give you a different feel.
Totally.
And, you know, going out and finding, you know, go to Pinterest or wherever, or whatever inspiration sites and sources that people have, you know, find something that feels right. It doesn't even have to be solving the same problem, but if it has the right feel, then that can really help inspire you to try to mimic certain aspects. Don't copy, but mimic certain aspects of it, and be transparent about that. That's what we do. It's fine. We all learn from each other always.
It's disturbing how much our brains are in sync, because this is, like, again, a huge part of what I encourage people to do is, like, not only find these things, but to make them on your phone too. Like, you can do video captures on your phone, and then that can be part of your library. That can be part of your pitch, you know? So like, I'm like, that's part of, that's part of the workshop is like, dude, like, you need to be able to have like your motion library, you know? Yeah. I love that. Man, thank you so much for your time. It's always great. I always feel like I learn a ton from you.
I think you froze.
Before it freezes again, I'm gonna go. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for inviting me, Issara. This was fun.
Yeah, this was great. All right.
Let's do it again.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Bye.